My husband's affair was exposed by our smart doorbell camera. My husband's affair appeared on our smart doorbell at 2:13 on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was 600 miles away attending my father's surgery. I remember the moment clearly because humiliation sharpens ordinary details. The room, the light, and the expressions around me all became fixed in memory. What looked small to everyone else felt like a verdict on who I was allowed to become. I did not have the language to challenge that verdict yet, so I watched, listened, and stored the truth. The camera captured only 18 seconds, but those seconds rearranged 12 years of marriage. The clip showed Marcus opening our front door for a woman wearing my robe beneath her coat, then leaning toward her with the familiarity of a ritual. I wrote the information down before speaking to anyone. That habit protected me from the subtle revisions that followed every confrontation. When a date later shifted or a promise became a misunderstanding, I could return to what had actually happened. The record did not make the situation less painful, but it prevented pain from being used to erase precision. I returned to doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements whenever pressure tried to blur what had happened. That discipline moved me closer to leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I almost missed the recording because Marcus had disabled motion alerts on my phone before I left. That detail mattered more than it seemed. In my family and in every institution surrounding us, appearances were often accepted before facts. Once a convenient version of me had been repeated, people treated my reaction as the problem, and the original cruelty as background noise. I began learning that silence protects the person who controls the story, not the person trying to survive it. He understood the device settings, but forgot that silencing an alert did not erase the archive. A package delivery notification reopened the application, and the cloud timeline displayed events the phone had never announced. The practical effect reached beyond that day. It changed where I lived, how I worked, and which relationships felt safe. I became more careful without becoming cold. Caution and bitterness are not the same thing. Caution asks for consistency before trust expands. Bitterness assumes consistency is impossible. I wanted a life built on the first, not imprisoned by the second. The clearest protection remained in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, where confidence could not rewrite sequence. It was one more quiet step toward leaving the marriage with the truth intact. The woman was Dana Cole, a consultant Marcus had repeatedly described as difficult and overly ambitious. I did not respond dramatically. Years of being underestimated had taught me that anger was easiest to dismiss when it arrived before evidence. Instead, I noticed dates, names, and the order in which people changed their explanations. My restraint was not weakness. It was the beginning of a record that would eventually become harder to ignore than any rumor. The performance of dislike had given their closeness a disguise. I had met her twice at company dinners, and once apologized when Marcus made a joke at her expense. I spoke with people who had no investment in protecting the approved version of events. Their questions were simple and therefore revealing. Who benefited? Who signed? Who had access? What changed afterward? Each answer stripped away another layer of sentiment. The situation became less mysterious as soon as I stopped treating ordinary misconduct as a private misunderstanding no outsider could examine. I kept doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements organized because memory deserved support when the stakes involved my safety, home, and financial future. The choice served a larger purpose, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. My father was sleeping after surgery when I watched the clip again. At the time, I still believed fairness would appear if I explained myself carefully enough. I thought a complete sentence, a clean document, or one honest witness could make people choose decency. The harder lesson was that some people understand perfectly and continue anyway because confusion benefits them. Once I accepted that, my decisions became clearer and much less apologetic. Distance, responsibility, and shock created a pause that later protected me. I sat in a hospital corridor beneath a television showing weather and forced myself not to call Marcus immediately. That was when fear became useful. Instead of letting it circle inside me, I turned it into a checklist. I preserved files, changed passwords, requested certified copies, and wrote down every contact. Action did not eliminate uncertainty, but it gave uncertainty boundaries. Within those boundaries, I could think clearly enough to recognize choices that panic had hidden. Each review of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements separated a provable fact from another convenient assumption. I measured progress by whether it supported leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I downloaded the original clip, exported the event log, and sent both to an encrypted account Marcus did not know existed. The pattern was familiar. Someone else created the damage, then assigned me responsibility for preventing consequences. Competence had always been used as a reason to demand more from me. I had confused being dependable with being endlessly available. That day forced me to see the difference, and once I saw it, I could no longer return to the role they had prepared for me. The concealment had been planned, not improvised. The log showed that an administrator using his phone had changed my notification permissions 2 days before my trip. The consequence was not immediate, which made the waiting difficult. People who rely on pressure often interpret delay as victory. They become careless, repeat false claims, and commit themselves to details they cannot later reconcile. I let time do that work. Every additional explanation created another point that could be compared with the documents already in my possession. I relied on doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements without asking them to carry emotions they could not measure. For the first time, the path toward leaving the marriage with the truth intact felt practical rather than imaginary. The timeline contained months of missing motion events, each marked as manually deleted from the household view, but retained in a 30-day recovery folder. There was nothing cinematic about my response. I went home, opened a notebook, and began arranging what I knew. Dates created a spine. Receipts and messages added weight. Memory supplied context, but I refused to rely on memory alone. I wanted a version of events that would remain true even when affection, embarrassment, and family pressure tried to soften it. Our front porch had kept a more accurate calendar than my marriage. I restored the available entries and saw Dana arriving during supposed client dinners, gym sessions, and weekend errands. I began noticing who asked how I was and who asked only what I planned to do. The difference separated concern from strategy. Some people wanted reconciliation before accountability because conflict made them uncomfortable. Others quietly offered dates, copies, or memories that helped. I stopped counting neutrality as kindness. In a dispute built on erasure, refusing to look usually protects the person holding the match. The trail through doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements became a structure strong enough to protect my safety, home, and financial future. I did not need certainty about everything. I needed the next action to support leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Some clips showed only her shoes or car because Marcus led her through the garage. People often imagine betrayal as one loud discovery. Mine arrived as a sequence of small contradictions, a changed time, a missing page, a casual sentence that did not match the previous one. Each inconsistency could have been dismissed alone. Together, they formed a design. Recognizing that design was painful, but it also ended the exhausting work of pretending everything might still be accidental. Repetition removed every possibility of an innocent explanation. Others captured laughter, overnight bags, and the code she used at the side door. Professional advice gave names to behavior I had experienced only as confusion: misrepresentation, coercion, concealment, retaliation. The words were not magic, but they organized the chaos. Once conduct had a name, it could be answered through a process rather than another circular argument. That shift returned energy I had wasted trying to make unreasonable people admit they were being unreasonable. Whenever explanations shifted, doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements returned the situation to its original shape. The decision made sense because it protected the possibility of leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I called a family law attorney named Priya Shah from the hospital parking structure. I slept badly afterward, replaying every decision that had brought me there. Shame tried to persuade me that I should have predicted the harm sooner. By morning, I understood that trust was not the mistake. The mistake belonged to the person who had treated trust as an unlocked door. That distinction gave me enough steadiness to take the next practical step. Her advice replaced the revenge scenes in my head with a plan centered on safety and lawful preservation. She told me not to alter shared accounts, confront either person, or access devices I was not authorized to use. I checked the original source whenever possible. Screenshots could be edited, stories polished, and partial documents arranged to create a false impression. Originals carried metadata, handwriting, sequence, and context. The more closely I examined them, the less power the public version held. Truth was not louder, but it was denser. It connected in ways invention could not sustain. I preserved doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements so that exhaustion would never become permission to erase my safety, home, and financial future. I kept going with one standard in mind: leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus and I owned our home jointly, but most investment accounts were managed through his financial planning practice. The people around me preferred an emotional explanation because emotion could be questioned. Records were less cooperative. A timestamp did not care who was charming. A signature did not become authentic because relatives wanted peace. A financial transfer did not turn into generosity when described at dinner. I began separating what could be proved from what others merely hoped I would accept. The affair raised a second question. What else had depended on my inattention? I had trusted quarterly summaries and signed tax returns after reviewing totals rather than underlying statements. My instinct was to protect innocent people from the fallout, even when that protection might also shield the person responsible. I had to distinguish compassion from concealment. Compassion helps someone survive a consequence. Concealment prevents the consequence from arriving. I could offer the first without participating in the second, and that became the line I used in every decision afterward. The evidence in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements did not need drama. Consistency gave it weight. Even on difficult days, the work returned me to leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Priya's forensic accountant helped me request records I was entitled to receive. For years, I had measured strength by how much discomfort I could absorb without inconveniencing anyone. That definition served everyone except me. Real strength, I discovered, sometimes looked like refusing the emergency, declining the invitation, or letting another adult meet the consequence attached to a choice. It felt unnatural at first because healthy boundaries often feel cruel to people trained by unhealthy expectations. Personal betrayal and financial concealment had been growing together. Statements showed recurring payments to a furnished apartment company, restaurants in neighborhoods Marcus claimed never to visit, and transfers to a consulting entity Dana controlled. The old version of me would have accepted a private compromise and called it peace. I now understood that secrecy was part of the mechanism. A private settlement without correction would leave the lie available for future use. I did not need public humiliation, but I did need the official record to reflect what happened. Accuracy was not revenge. It was the end of enforced confusion. I learned to trust the connections inside doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements more than anyone's rehearsed certainty. The point was no longer to change another person, but to continue leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus called every night from our kitchen and asked about Dad's recovery. No single piece of information changed everything. The change came from accumulation. One document supported another. One witness explained a gap. One inconsistency made the next question unavoidable. I stopped asking whether the truth was dramatic enough and focused on whether it was complete. Completeness became my protection against a story designed to survive through exhaustion. His ordinary tone became more disturbing than open cruelty. Behind him, the wall clock showed a time inconsistent with the doorbell logs, and once I heard Dana's distinctive laugh before he muted the call. Small acts of preparation began changing how I carried myself. I stopped flinching at urgent messages. I read documents twice. I asked for requests in writing. The people pressuring me described this as hostility because informality had always favored them. Structure felt aggressive only to those who depended on blurred boundaries. To me, It felt like air entering a room that had been closed for years. With doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements in order, I no longer had to win every conversation to protect my safety, home, and financial future. Every boundary became part of leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I returned home 2 days earlier than planned, but stayed with my friend Lila. I kept my plans private. The people who had underestimated me were comfortable because they mistook quiet for surrender. They expected either tears they could criticize or anger they could use as proof. I gave them neither. I gave myself time, professional advice, and permission to make decisions without announcing them to anyone who had already shown contempt for my interests. Instead, I collected personal documents while he was at work and photographed the condition of every room. A locksmith could not remove Marcus from jointly owned property without an order, so we installed no dramatic new locks. I grieved while I worked. Those activities can exist together. I could miss the person I believed someone was while protecting myself from the person their choices revealed. I could remember good years without allowing those memories to cancel present evidence. Holding both truths was harder than choosing either denial or hatred, but it left me with a future not organized around resentment. The growing file of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements allowed the truth to survive moods, loyalties, and delay. That was how an impossible ambition, leaving the marriage with the truth intact, became a series of ordinary decisions. The robe from the video hung freshly washed in my closet. The hardest part was not gathering information. It was releasing the fantasy that the right evidence would restore the relationship I thought we had. Evidence could establish facts and shape consequences, but it could not manufacture remorse. Accepting that limitation kept me from bargaining away my safety in exchange for an apology someone offered only when every other option had failed. Small domestic choices revealed how confidently they had occupied my absence. Dana's earring lay beneath the guest room radiator, and 2 wine glasses sat behind appliances in a cabinet Marcus rarely used. When the pressure increased, I returned to the simplest question. What would I advise a stranger with the same facts? Distance made the answer obvious. I would never tell another woman to surrender records, money, work, or safety merely to prove she loved people who had already used love as leverage. I began offering myself the same basic loyalty I would have offered anyone else. I treated doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements as a map, using each verified detail to decide the next safe step. The outcome remained uncertain, but my direction was not, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus noticed that I had returned when the doorbell recognized my face. By then, I understood that dignity is rarely recovered through a perfect speech. It returns through repeated choices. I answered only what required an answer. I stopped defending facts that were already documented. I allowed silence to remain in rooms where I had once rushed to make everyone comfortable. The balance of power changed before anyone else was willing to name it. I said Dad was stable and that I needed rest, giving him no accusation to prepare against. He called within seconds and asked why I had not told him. The turning point came quietly. I realized I was no longer waiting for permission to protect what mattered. Approval from the people benefiting from my silence was never going to arrive. I made the necessary call, signed the necessary form, and accepted that being misunderstood was less dangerous than remaining available for the next violation. What I could establish through doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements mattered more than what pressure asked me to overlook. I allowed the next step to be enough as long as it advanced, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. That night, the device log showed Marcus deleting another block of events and removing Dana's guest code. What happened next looked sudden to outsiders, but it had been built through years of preparation. Skills gained in ordinary jobs, friendships maintained without advantage, and records kept when no one expected them to matter all converged. The same people who had mistaken patience for passivity discovered that patience can also be a method of becoming impossible to corner. His cleanup became additional evidence of consciousness rather than protection. He also changed the account password, unaware that exports already existed and that the provider would preserve audit records under legal request. Later, people called the result inevitable. It was not. The result depended on small choices made while I was tired and afraid, keeping a receipt, saving a message, asking one more question, refusing to sign. Justice often looks obvious only after someone has completed the invisible labor of making denial impossible. The discipline of maintaining doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements kept my safety, home, and financial future from becoming a bargaining chip. The more accurate the record became, the more possible it felt to continue leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Priya filed for divorce with requests for temporary financial restraints and exclusive use of the house. I was tempted to make the outcome personal. A part of me wanted the people who had diminished me to feel exactly what I had felt, but imitation would have kept them at the center of my life. I chose a cleaner form of justice: accurate facts, consistent rules, and consequences I did not need to exaggerate. Reality was sufficient once it was finally allowed into the room. A judge cared more about money and access than the emotional meaning of a robe. The petition did not dramatize the affair. It identified suspected dissipation of marital assets and preservation needs. That experience changed my idea of winning. Winning was not watching another person suffer. It was reaching a morning when their choices no longer determined the temperature of my day. It was having work, relationships, and a home that did not require me to shrink. The formal outcome mattered, but freedom was the part no order or judgment could award on my behalf. By following doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, I could move forward without depending on a confession. I could not control the response, only whether my actions remained aligned with leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus received the papers at his office and called me 43 times. The next development forced me to separate surprise from disbelief. Surprise passes when new information arrives. Disbelief keeps bargaining with information already present. I had spent too long bargaining. I read the facts in their plainest order and stopped inventing gentler motives simply because the real ones made me uncomfortable. The doorbell belonged to our shared household account, and reviewing my own home's security record was not surveillance of a stranger. His messages moved from confusion to apology, then accusation that I had invaded his privacy. I created a separate chronology for decisions still ahead. It listed what I knew, what remained uncertain, and which uncertainty actually mattered. The exercise prevented unanswered questions from becoming excuses for inaction. I did not need to solve every mystery before protecting myself from the facts already established. I returned to doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements whenever pressure tried to blur what had happened. That discipline moved me closer to leaving the marriage with the truth intact. He claimed the relationship began during a brief separation we had never had. I noticed how quickly people reached for my history when they could not answer my evidence. Old mistakes, old loyalties, and old insecurities were introduced as if they changed the current facts. I refused the detour. A person can be imperfect and still be correct about what happened, and I no longer allowed unrelated flaws to become a license for mistreatment. Calendar records, messages, travel receipts, and the ordinary continuity of our lives contradicted the invented separation. Dana repeated that story to friends, describing me as absent from the marriage and already planning divorce. The next conversation was shorter because I no longer filled silence with concessions. I stated the necessary point, requested a written response, and ended the exchange. Removing performance from conflict made the remaining issue easier to see. The clearest protection remained in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, where confidence could not rewrite sequence. It was one more quiet step toward leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Mutual friends urged me to meet Marcus privately before lawyers made everything hostile. The situation also revealed the cost of delayed boundaries. Every exception I had made to preserve calm had taught someone that persistence could overcome my refusal. I could not repair that lesson with another explanation. I repaired it by making the boundary predictable, written, and unaffected by the volume of the response. Communication continued through counsel except for practical matters documented in writing. I refused because privacy had already served him better than it served me. I asked a professional to test my assumptions rather than merely confirm them. Where the evidence was weak, we labeled it weak. Where another explanation remained possible, we preserved that possibility. Careful limits increased credibility and kept me from becoming attached to claims the record could not support. I kept doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements organized because memory deserved support when the stakes involved my safety, home, and financial future. The choice served a larger purpose, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. The forensic review found that Marcus had paid Dana's company nearly $90,000 over 18 months. There were days when progress looked like nothing more than not making the wrong call. I did not answer while angry, surrender while tired, or sign while rushed. Those absences were decisions. They created the space in which a better option could remain available long enough for me to recognize it. Several payments occurred within hours of large transfers from our joint investment account. Invoices described market research, but her business had no employees, reports, or relevant client work. Several documents arrived out of order, but their metadata restored the sequence. Creation dates, account numbers, and version histories exposed revisions that polished narratives had concealed. Details no one expected a reader to notice became anchors for the entire timeline. Each review of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements separated a provable fact from another convenient assumption. I measured progress by whether it supported leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Dana used part of the money for the furnished apartment and a vehicle registered in her name. I began treating credibility as something demonstrated through behavior rather than claimed through tone. Calm people could lie. Emotional people could tell the truth. The useful question was whether a statement remained consistent with records and later conduct. That standard protected me from charm without requiring me to distrust everyone. File metadata showed the documents had not existed when payments were made. Marcus described the transfers as legitimate business expenses and produced reports created after the divorce filing. I made practical plans for more than one outcome. That reduced the power of threats based on uncertainty. If the best result failed, I still had housing, work, support, and a lawful next step. Contingency planning turned fear from a wall into a set of doors. I relied on doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements without asking them to carry emotions they could not measure. For the first time, the path toward leaving the marriage with the truth intact felt practical rather than imaginary. The doorbell archive provided a timeline connecting transfers with visits. As the timeline grew clearer, several memories changed meaning. Comments I had dismissed as jokes now looked like testing. Sudden emergencies looked like rehearsals for later pressure. I resisted the temptation to rewrite every good memory as false. The past was complicated, but complication did not require me to deny the pattern visible in the present. The camera did not prove the accounting scheme alone, but it connected records that would otherwise appear unrelated. On 4 dates, Dana arrived carrying folders shortly after money moved, and Marcus later deleted the events. The emotional requests intensified as the formal options narrowed. I answered compassionately without changing the underlying position. Kindness did not require inconsistency, and a boundary did not become punishment merely because someone disliked meeting it. The trail through doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements became a structure strong enough to protect my safety, home, and financial future. I did not need certainty about everything. I needed the next action to support leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus's practice placed him on administrative leave after the court filings revealed possible use of client business accounts for personal expenses. The people responsible expected my empathy to weaken my position. They knew I could imagine fear, debt, ambition, and shame from another person's perspective. What they misunderstood was that understanding a motive does not erase agency. I could recognize why someone made a choice and still refuse to carry the consequence. Required financial disclosures reached the appropriate compliance officers without my assistance. I did not contact his employer or publish the video. One witness remembered a detail everyone else had overlooked. It did not decide the matter alone, but it connected two records previously treated as separate. I documented the recollection promptly and let the appropriate process determine its weight. Whenever explanations shifted, doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements returned the situation to its original shape. The decision made sense because it protected the possibility of leaving the marriage with the truth intact. He offered an early settlement that gave me the house if I waived claims to hidden funds and agreed the footage would remain confidential. I allowed myself one evening to feel the full insult of it. I did not convert the feeling into a message or decision. I walked, cried, and let anger complete its honest work of showing me where a boundary had been crossed. The next morning, I could act without asking anger to design the outcome. His proposal used a familiar asset to distract from money I could not yet see. The house carried a large mortgage and deferred repairs, while the concealed transfers exceeded the equity he offered. I reviewed my own conduct with the same seriousness I expected from others. Where I had made assumptions, I corrected them. Where my language had been sharper than necessary, I acknowledged it. Accountability strengthened my position because it was a practice, not a weapon reserved for opponents. I preserved doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements so that exhaustion would never become permission to erase my safety, home, and financial future. I kept going with one standard in mind: leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Priya advised countering only after the forensic accountant completed tracing. Each new fact narrowed the space available for coincidence. The explanation now required too many unrelated accidents, all benefiting the same person and all disadvantaging me. Probability became its own form of clarity. I stopped apologizing for recognizing a pattern that had been carefully created. The account held investments and withdrawals Marcus had omitted from our taxes and marital disclosures. Additional statements revealed a brokerage account opened with my electronically copied signature. The official process imposed deadlines that emotion had never respected. Claims required support, responses required consistency, and delay carried defined consequences. Structure did not guarantee justice, but it removed many hiding places. The evidence in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements did not need drama. Consistency gave it weight. Even on difficult days, the work returned me to leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Device location records placed his phone at home when the signature authorization supposedly occurred at his office. I changed my routines before I changed my public position. Access was reviewed, important papers moved, and private conversations limited. These choices looked excessive only if the threat was imaginary. Once the records confirmed intent, basic preparation became an ordinary expression of self-respect. Technology he installed for convenience became a neutral witness to the timing of deception. The smart doorbell log showed Dana entering minutes before the authorization message was sent. I declined invitations to discuss the matter through intermediaries carrying incomplete messages. Triangles had kept our conflicts alive for years. Direct written communication reduced misunderstanding and prevented each person from editing the exchange for a different audience. I learned to trust the connections inside doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements more than anyone's rehearsed certainty. The point was no longer to change another person, but to continue leaving the marriage with the truth intact. At the temporary hearing, Marcus's attorney argued that I was using adultery to destroy his career. A few people surprised me by telling the truth when doing so offered them no advantage. Their honesty did not solve the dispute, but it reminded me that loyalty and integrity were not opposites. The healthiest support came from people who did not ask me to distort facts in order to prove affection. The judge froze the hidden brokerage funds, ordered fees for the forensic review, and granted me temporary use of the house. Priya presented only records relevant to asset preservation, account access, and credibility. Money became easier to discuss once every amount had a source and date. Vague phrases such as family help, shared sacrifice, or business necessity dissolved when compared with transfers and balances. Precision returned moral weight to choices that euphemisms had tried to make harmless. With doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements in order, I no longer had to win every conversation to protect my safety, home, and financial future. Every boundary became part of leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Dana ended the relationship after learning Marcus had told her the apartment would become theirs once he controlled the divorce narrative. The pressure campaign depended on speed. Urgent calls arrived before documents, emotional appeals before complete explanations, and deadlines before independent advice. I slowed every step down. Time was not avoidance. It was the condition required for informed consent. Her cooperation did not make her innocent, but it made his competing stories impossible to maintain. She retained counsel and produced messages in which he promised assets that were jointly owned. I protected time for ordinary life while the dispute continued. I worked, cooked, slept, and answered friends about subjects unrelated to the crisis. Refusing to let the conflict occupy every hour was not denial. It was practice for the life I intended to have afterward. The growing file of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements allowed the truth to survive moods, loyalties, and delay. That was how an impossible ambition, leaving the marriage with the truth intact, became a series of ordinary decisions. Marcus eventually admitted the affair and most financial transfers during mediation. I learned to recognize false balance. One person had acted, another had discovered it, yet observers described both as equally responsible for the conflict. That framing rewarded the original act and punished the refusal to conceal it. I would discuss my response honestly, but I would not accept half the blame for a choice I did not make. Emotion could explain desire, not the architecture built to finance it. He continued describing himself as lonely until the mediator asked why loneliness required a false consulting company and copied signature. A proposed compromise solved the visible emergency while preserving the mechanism that created it. I rejected it for that reason. A durable solution had to change access, authority, or accountability, not merely postpone the next demand. I treated doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements as a map, using each verified detail to decide the next safe step. The outcome remained uncertain, but my direction was not, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. The final settlement restored my share of diverted funds, transferred additional retirement assets to offset money that could not be recovered, and required sale of the house. The truth did not need me to sound invulnerable. I could admit fear, grief, and uncertainty without weakening the facts. In fact, releasing the performance of perfect strength made my decisions more accurate. I asked for help where I needed it, and kept responsibility where it belonged. No order could repay trust, but the numbers no longer rewarded its violation. Marcus accepted responsibility for tax corrections and professional consequences tied to his accounts. I noticed that my body recognized danger before my thoughts admitted it. Tight shoulders, shallow sleep, and the urge to check messages constantly all eased when communication moved into formal channels. Safety became measurable in ordinary physical ways. What I could establish through doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements mattered more than what pressure asked me to overlook. I allowed the next step to be enough, as long as it advanced, leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I chose to sell, rather than remain in rooms converted into evidence. Soon, the dispute reached people who knew none of us personally. Their distance felt frightening at first, then relieving. They were interested in authority, dates, duties, and documents, rather than family roles or social rank. The questions became narrower, and the answers became harder to manipulate. The device had protected me once, but I did not want my next home organized around watching. Before closing, I removed the smart doorbell and replaced it with a basic model for the new owners. The most useful allies did not promise victory. They explained risk, documented options, and told me when my preferred interpretation exceeded the evidence. Their honesty made them trustworthy in a way unconditional agreement never could. The discipline of maintaining doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements kept my safety, home, and financial future from becoming a bargaining chip. The more accurate the record became, the more possible it felt to continue leaving the marriage with the truth intact. Marcus lost his position and later worked under supervision at a smaller firm after completing compliance requirements. I stopped rehearsing the speech that would finally make everyone understand. Understanding was not a prerequisite for protection. Some people would continue preferring the version that demanded least from them. My task was to make sure their preference could not control the formal outcome. Their consequences unfolded without updates from me. Dana dissolved her consulting company and repaid part of the disputed money through a separate agreement. Once the central facts were accepted, the remaining arguments shifted toward intent. I understood why. People often hope a sympathetic motive will cancel an objective act. Motive can shape consequence, but it cannot make an unauthorized signature, transfer, or decision disappear. By following doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, I could move forward without depending on a confession. I could not control the response, only whether my actions remained aligned with leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I rented an apartment near my father's rehabilitation center and rebuilt routines that belonged only to me. The emerging consequences were created by the original choices, not by my decision to document them. I repeated that distinction whenever guilt arrived. A smoke alarm does not start the fire, and the person who calls for help does not create the damage responders uncover. Ordinary evenings became a form of recovery. Silence stopped feeling suspicious when it was no longer shared with a liar. I prepared for the formal meeting by arranging the story around verified events rather than emotional importance. The most painful moment was not always the legally relevant one. Respecting that difference allowed the decision-maker to see the pattern without being asked to carry my entire grief. I returned to doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements whenever pressure tried to blur what had happened. That discipline moved me closer to leaving the marriage with the truth intact. The exported clips remain with my legal records, not on my phone. For the first time, I could imagine an ending that was not reconciliation or destruction. There was a third possibility: accurate distance. We could occupy the same history without sharing access, and I could release the argument without surrendering the record. Evidence can be essential without becoming a place where a person continues to live. I have watched the first one only once since the divorce. When a fair opportunity for resolution finally appeared, I evaluated it against the future rather than the insult. I asked whether it restored resources, corrected the record, and reduced the chance of repetition. Satisfaction mattered less than stability. The clearest protection remained in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, where confidence could not rewrite sequence. It was one more quiet step toward leaving the marriage with the truth intact. My husband's affair was exposed by our smart doorbell because he confused control of notifications with control of truth. The result began taking shape through ordinary procedures rather than dramatic revelation. Notices were delivered, accounts reconciled, and statements compared. That quiet machinery mattered because it gave the truth somewhere to go after private appeals had failed. The greater protection came from what I did after the alert appeared. The camera did not save my marriage. It saved me from spending more years inside a story designed to keep me uninformed. After the decision, I changed passwords and routines one final time, then stopped checking for new harm every hour. Protection that never allows vigilance to end becomes another kind of captivity. I wanted safeguards strong enough to let attention return to life. I kept doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements organized because memory deserved support when the stakes involved my safety, home, and financial future. The choice served a larger purpose: leaving the marriage with the truth intact. On the anniversary of my father's surgery, he and I sat on my new balcony while rain moved across the streetlights. I understood then why the earlier version of events had lasted so long. It was emotionally convenient, socially familiar, and expensive to challenge. Truth required work from people who had benefited from not looking. I could not perform all of that work for them, but I could refuse to finance the lie with my silence. For the first time in years, I did not need a device to tell me whether I was safe at home. My phone remained quiet on the table, and quiet meant exactly what it seemed to mean. The first peaceful week felt strangely empty. I had become accustomed to using every spare thought for preparation. Gradually, the empty space filled with work, friendship, and plans that had no connection to the dispute. That was recovery becoming visible. Each review of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements separated a provable fact from another convenient assumption. I measured progress by whether it supported leaving the marriage with the truth intact. I did not leave the experience unchanged. I became slower to confuse familiarity with safety and less willing to treat urgency as authority. That was not cynicism. It was the discipline of making room for facts before surrendering my safety, home, and financial future. The official record eventually became shorter than the years leading to it. A few pages contained dates, findings, and consequences. What those pages could not show was the private work required to stop organizing my life around my husband Marcus. People sometimes asked whether I felt vindicated. The word suggested a single, satisfying moment, but recovery was quieter. It arrived when I could think about the future without first calculating how my husband Marcus might react. I kept copies of doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements in one secure place and stopped carrying them through every ordinary day. Evidence had completed its job. I was allowed to build a life in which protection existed without constant vigilance. In the end, leaving the marriage with the truth intact required more courage than any public confrontation. It meant refusing to become a mirror of the behavior that hurt me. I could insist on consequence without making cruelty my inheritance. The people who had watched from a distance preferred to describe the ending as a reversal of fortune. That description missed the years of work between injury and consequence. Nothing had turned by magic. I had simply stopped donating my silence, labor, and doubt to a version of events that protected my husband Marcus. I also learned that an accurate ending does not require every relationship to be repaired. Some connections became smaller, some disappeared, and a few became more honest after access was no longer automatic. Loss remained loss, but it no longer had authority over my safety, home, and financial future. Looking back, the decisive moments were rarely the loudest ones. They were the mornings when I preserved one more file, asked for one more explanation in writing, or declined to solve a crisis I had not created. Those choices accumulated until leaving the marriage with the truth intact was no longer an idea, but the shape of my daily life. I did not tell the story to prove that patience always wins. Patience without action can become permission. What protected me was patient action. Checking doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements, seeking advice, and choosing a response that would still make sense after the immediate anger passed. There are parts of the experience I still dislike remembering. Healing did not turn betrayal into a useful gift, and success did not make the original harm necessary. I grew because I worked to recover, not because my husband Marcus secretly taught me a lesson I should be grateful to receive. The future became ordinary again in the best possible way. I made plans without building them around another person's emergency. I spent time with people who could hear no without treating it as abandonment. The protection of my safety, home, and financial future stopped feeling like a battle and became part of how I lived. If I had one truth to give the person I was at the beginning, it would be this: evidence is not cold, boundaries are not cruelty, and refusing to carry another adult's consequence is not revenge. Those tools made room for leaving the marriage with the truth intact when promises and apologies could not. Eventually, I could hold the whole history without needing to change its ending in my imagination. The facts were established, the consequence belonged where it fell, and my attention was free to move elsewhere. That freedom was the outcome I had wanted long before I knew how to name it. Time did not erase what happened, but it changed the scale. What once filled every thought became one completed part of a much larger life. I could remember my husband Marcus without immediately returning to the moment when my safety, home, and financial future seemed most vulnerable. The final proof was not contained in doorbell footage, device logs, messages, and financial statements. It appeared in my habits. I no longer apologized for careful questions, confused pressure with love, or waited for an unfair person to approve my boundary. The documents had secured the record. Living differently secured the future. I moved forward without declaring the past forgiven or unforgiven. Those labels mattered less than the practical truth that it no longer governed my choices. In that quiet independence, leaving the marriage with the truth intact became something I could continue long after the formal dispute ended.